والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين شفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين وأصحابه المنتجبين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى قيام يوم الدين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I would like to talk today about the movie that we are all talking of, The Lady of Heaven. And I have to admit that in order to talk about the movie, I've had to watch it. And I talk today not as somebody belonging to the Shia faith or to the Sunni faith, but rather as a Muslim. Now, before we go on to discussing some of the content of the movie, I have to admit that looking at the Shias and Sunnis, I can sympathize with both sides. More than sympathize, can empathize with them. If a group of people believe that the Prophet was murdered by his wives, or that the blessed daughter of the blessed Prophet was attacked inside her own house and kicked and beaten, then I can understand how they must be feeling inside themselves, especially for them to then see that the killers are celebrated by the Muslims, be they the wives of the Prophet or the close companions of the Prophet. On the other hand, when I look towards the side of the Sunni, I can empathize there as well. That how can anyone claim that the wives of the Prophet, especially those who are dear to him, can actually poison and assassinate the Prophet on the instructions of their fathers, who were the closest companions of the Blessed Prophet and the Khalifas of the Muslims, and those who spread Islam far and wide. And how can it be tolerated, the accusation that the blessed daughter of the Prophet, who Aisha claims to be the queen of women of paradise and mankind, she narrates from the Prophet, that the second Khalifa, who is a companion of the Prophet, can go and beat her, hit her, and cause her to miscarry her child, and then subsequently lead to her death. So when looked at from both sides, you can actually see that if I was a Shia, looking at it from the Shia perspective, I would be very offended. And I would say, you know what, doesn't matter even if I'm killed for speaking this. If I was a Sunni, I would say I'm extremely offended. I will defend the honor of the wives of the Prophet and the Sahaba, even if I'm killed. In this respect, we cannot blame the masses for reacting the way the masses are reacting. I will go further and say we cannot even blame the preachers for narrating what they are narrating. The reason is that all of these things are found within the Shia Sunni historical texts. And when they are found within the historical texts, and scholars who read these historical texts, not being historians or not being people who are able to establish the historicity of events and verify what is credible as opposed to what is not, then of course they are sincerely then narrating these events. So it looked at it from this side and this angle, you can see that, yeah, I can see how both of them are feeling and why both are justified in the way in which they are reacting. Now, the first thing we need to understand is there a protocol of behavior required by a Muslim or from a Muslim through his commitment to Islam? Think about this carefully. As Muslims, we are committed to upholding the message of Islam as delivered through the Quran and by the conduct of the Prophet, Imams, the great Lady of Peace, Bibi Fatima, and the Sahaba. When we look at the message of Islam, we find that Islam wants harmonious coexistence of the Muslims with the broader faith. So there is no question. The question of Muslim in fighting is not even assumed within Islam. It's a foregone conclusion that the Muslims have to be one. In fact, according to the Shia understanding, Imam Ali let his right slip away in order to maintain the unity of the Ummah. According to the narrative of this movie as well, the Lady of Paradise was a broker of peace amidst the turbulences. Now, when looking at our commitment to Islam and to the Blessed Prophet and the Imams and the Lady of Heaven and the Sahaba, we will say our commitment to Islam says we cannot act in a way that causes sectarian strife. Our commitment to Islam does not even allow us to bring about a situation in which there is religious strife between Islam and other faiths. That's the first thing we have to understand, that as Muslims we have to be responsible. So now, to then portray these events in a way in which they are portrayed, does that not defeat the very purpose of Islam? And does that not then infringe with our commitment with Islam or to Islam to maintain one solid body of Muslims? So the first thing we need to ask here is that the movie is an attempt to undo whatever Islam asks us to do. And the movie contradicts the very claim it makes, that Bibi Fatima was the broker of peace, yet the name of Bibi Fatima is used to create sectarian strife and tension. The first thing we need to understand is that even if these things are true, and I'm going to discuss them in a little while, expressions of this sort are counterproductive and inconsistent with the very message of the Blessed Lady. The second thing I want to point out is that there is no question of freedom of speech and expression being a human right. And I would not want to say anything to curtail that. Banning people, banning this, slogans, cursing people, inciting people to violence, this is not Islam. It is below human dignity, leave aside Islam. However, what I want to ask here is that the right of expression, should it not be a measured activity, a mature endeavor of how to express? Does right of expression allow us to offend or be dishonest in portraying whatever we are portraying? When there are several narratives, to present only one narrative, isn't that dishonesty? And two, the right of expression, if it leads to societal discord, then shouldn't the human dignity in itself bar us from expressing things that are volatile. Now, even if at our human level we are not curtailed in our activities that are harmful and injurious to the community, then our commitment to Islam should surely curtail us in the way we express ourselves. Our commitment to Islam is to uphold the goodness amongst the creatures of God, and by priority amongst the people who follow the message of the Blessed Prophet. So a Muslim, given the right of freedom to express, should either curtail themselves from expressing certain truths and expressing them in or on platforms where such expressions are acceptable, or express themselves in a manner that is mature and filled with wisdom. So even if we say that we have a right to say what we want, then that right in itself should be exercised in a way that is pleasing to God and is in line with the teachings of Islam, especially when used by a Muslim. Now here we ask the Shia, well, why do you say such things? So they will say, well, it's there in the Sunni books. You see, here is the thing, that the Sunnis don't know that this narrative is found within the Sunni books. Now you ask an ordinary Shia, do you believe in this? They will say, yes, of course I do. You ask an ordinary Shia preacher, they say, of course I do, it's in the Sunni books. Why wouldn't I believe in it? So Sunnis need to know that all these things are within the Sunni books. Look, it is there. But at the same time, we need to ask the Shia, is everything that is found within your books and Sunni books accurate? Would you say that they are all accurate? And the answer here is, well, probably not. We'll say, well then, why can't we subject such history to scrutiny and try and decipher where it's coming from? What is accurate amongst it and what is inaccurate? So we say, well, several Sunni books have narrated this. You ask the Sunnis, they say, well, it all comes from a singular source. The book of Sulaim bin Qais, which is the earliest book, allegedly recorded by a companion of Imam Ali salamullah alayh, who later on served Al-Hassan al-Hussein and up to Imam Baqir. He gave it to somebody else who then made it public in the 2nd century. So we asked the Shia, what about this book? Sunnis are saying and speculating that this information is taken from a Shia book. So you ask Sayyid Sistani and Munir al-Khabbaz, who was talking for the World Federation in their conference on theology or theological issues, where they were debating Ziyarat Ashura and Ilmul Ghaib of the Prophet, in which Munir al-Khabbaz clearly says that, for example, the method of Ayatollah Sistani in establishing the validity of ahadith is X, Y, and Z, and in that he mentions that Sayyid Sistani would not hold the contents of Sulaim bin Qais as credible. So now when such a giant authority of the Shia that the Shias are following, I'm telling the Shias what they are following, if he is discrediting this early text, then anything that is drawn from this early text is similarly unreliable. Before Sayyid Sistani was another giant, Sayyid al-Khuy, who was his mentor and his teacher. Sayyid al-Khuy, through his own way, found that the chain of reports of Sulaim bin Qais, or the one that makes it public after Sulaim bin Qais, is somebody who you cannot trust, and therefore the book is not reliable. If you look at the past masters of the Shias, Mufid does not find it reliable, Hilli does not find it reliable. So I asked the preachers of the Shia that please do some research. And then when you're narrating this, also say to the audience two things. One is that the person that you have been following for the past or over 30 years does not believe in the credibility of the book that carries this incident in the very first instance. And his teacher that the community followed for over 20 years or about 20 years also did not believe in this or the reliability of this text. So for the last 50 years, the masters of Shia faith, whom the Shia congregation has been following, do not find the original source as credible. Say it to the audience. Be honest. Now I know maybe a lot of the preachers have not researched it, but now it's an opportunity, research it and say to the audience. Also say to the audience that in addition with this particular narrative are various other ones as well that all confirm that there was altercation at the door of Bibi Fatima. There were threats that were made. Also tell them that there are a variety of versions of this story. In one, Zubair, and in another one, Zubair and Talha were there. Zubair runs out of the house with his sword unsheathed. When the threat was being made, he tripped over something and his sword fell. And then he was arrested or taken away. Say that version as well. That nobody entered the house, but somebody ran out of the house. Then, I would like to take a different approach. That just because a book says an event happened, does that mean we stop using our minds? We are so good as Muslim to critique the sources and the historical texts of other faiths. Why can't we put our own text to the same level of scrutiny now I'm going to use this word without offense, at a lay level scrutiny. We don't have to be scholars. We can just be the laity, grassroots, and use our common sense. To say that Bibi Aisha and Bibi Hafsa, on the instructions of Khalifa Abu Bakr and Umar, poisoned the Prophet, does that really make sense? Read Surah Tahrim in the Quran, where Aisha and Hafsa and maybe other women of the household of the Prophet, his wives, felt a form of jealousy, as is our human condition. So they convinced the Prophet either of not consuming a particular food substance that one of his wives was giving him, or not to visit one of his spouses or partners. Now here the Quran steps in. It says, "Oh Muhammad, why do you make haram what Allah has made halal for you?" And then it reprimands in the sternest tones the two wives of the Prophet. And says, if we want, He will get rid of you and change you with wives who are obedient, faithful, full of iman, praying to Allah, virgins and divorcees or widows. Now I'm saying, if the Quran cannot tolerate minor nuisance from the wives of the Prophet against the Prophet, do you think that Quran would tolerate the conspiracy to poison the Prophet and then to kill the Prophet and remain silent? When you read the history of the Muslims, they used to be petrified that if they say anything unbefitting to the Prophet, least the Quran speaks against them. Omar, on one occasion, spoke to the wives of the Prophet. And I believe it was his own daughter said to him, aren't you afraid that the Quran might be revealed in response to what you're saying? Another incident, Umar was petrified at the Sulh Hudaybiyah and the comments that he made. And he was scared that the Quran will be revealed, reprimanding him. And that would become eternal within the Quran. For people who are that afraid of the Quran coming and exposing them, do you think that they would even have thought of poisoning the Prophet? And had they poisoned the Prophet, do you think the Quran would have remained silent? Really? Does that really add up? Now we look at the incident of the door. With full sympathy I'm saying this. Now we look at the incident of the door. Well, where is it coming from? We have a host of ahadith from the sixth Imam. One of the hadith is quoted in Kamilu Ziyarat of Qawlaway, nearing the last Imams, 11th and 12th. He said when the Prophet went to Mi'raj and Allah told him that Bibi Fatima will be killed and Mohsin will be miscarried and so on and so forth. Now, if you look at the hadith of Mi'raj, you will find so much in them, and then when you contrast them against history, you say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Hadith of Mi'raj tells the Prophet the names of each one of his successor, but the Muslims are always fighting after the death of an Imam that who is the next Imam. According to some historical sort of texts, Imam Sadiq, obviously, I'm saying according to some, with the Shias believe in, thought that Ismail would succeed him, and Ismail died. So if it was already told to him from the Prophet's heavenly ascension that this is going to be the Imam after you, then how come Imam Sadiq did not know? There are so many inconsistencies. They have to be subjected to critique, highest level of critique, these texts. I've asked a simple question from the Shia scholars. Does it make sense that Imam Ali and Bibi Fatima salamul alayhima lived in a room that is lived in a house that is the size of a moderate living room of the houses that we live in today? They had small houses. When you go to the Masjid of Prophet, you will see where he lived, and normally in the descriptions. And we don't find a partition or a wall within that room. So it's presumably one room. Now Imam Ali is there. Let's say when Talha is not there and Ibn Abbas is not there and nobody is there. Salman is not there, nobody is there. Just Imam Ali and his little family. So Imam Ali is there, Bibi Fatima is there, Al-Hasan al-Hussein, Bibi Zainab and Bibi Kulthum are there. Now, there is shouting at the door and Imam Ali just sits there. Now, is he sitting away from Bibi Fatima or facing Bibi Fatima? Whatever the case, he is sitting there and the room is small. I'm talking about like scrutiny to the highest level is needed. Then the door is pushed and the nail goes inside her womb, and there's no mention of the nail in Sulaim bin Qais, what I read. Fine. Then he strikes her with his sheathed sword. Then he slaps her. Then he kicks her. Then he whips her. Now, why aren't the children screaming and crying there? Where have they disappeared to? I'm talking about the version of the movie, yes? Why does it take Imam Ali so long to walk from here to there? That he's seeing him manhandle the daughter of the Prophet. Why does it take him so long to walk a few steps? That doesn't make sense. I can understand that things might have happened spontaneously. Door is pushed, but as soon as the door is pushed, Imam Ali is there, the raging lion of Allah. Now we are told by the pulpits, and obviously in my younger days, I too was committed to this narrative. I'm not going to lie. Our love for Bibi Fatima is such that at times we lose sense of reason and logic. That if we can say that the door was pushed swiftly, then Imam Ali would be there. Now, the excuse they give is that Imam Ali remembered that the Prophet said that this will happen and you got to bear patiently. Can the Prophet tell Imam Ali to do contrary to what Allah commands the Prophet and Imam Ali? To defend themselves or to defend their honor and to defend the daughter of the Prophet. So today's Muslims are saying, we will stand by Bibi Fatima even if we are killed. But Imam Ali couldn't do that. If a scholar was being attacked there in front of me, I would go and give my life to save him. Yes? And if the Prophet were to say that this is a righteous, godly man, I'm asking you not to defend him, we will say, oh Prophet, are you sure you are saying in accordance with what you have taught us? Can you see that? That I can't defend a fellow human when the Quran says, "Man ahyaha faqad ahya nasa jami'aha." Oh Prophet, how can you say this? So obviously the Prophet has not said these things. Who can stop you from defending yourself when it's the human right and human dictate? And who stops you from defending your wife? In fact, if a person doesn't defend his wife, and the wife who is the queen of paradise, the daughter of Muhammad Rasulullah, the daughter of Khadija, Imam Ali should have sacrificed himself 1,000 times over to save his beloved wife, and he should have killed Umar right there. He should have unsheathed his sword or strangled him and put him to death. Finish. Do you get it? Then again I ask, the Fadak incident happened, and according to the Shia version, Bibi Fatima did not spare them. And we know that. And she was extremely adamant to uphold the truth and righteousness. The most just woman we have seen. Defiant to the core. That's where Imam Hussein gets that defiance from. Do you think that the beloved lady, this grand pillar of strength, the daughter of Muhammad, the daughter of Khadija, the wife of Ali, salamullah alayhim ajma'in, would not tell them that you broke into my house? How dare you? Fadak means next to nothing compared to this crime. In fact, I will say Ashura means nothing compared to this crime. You know, when you start believing in this, I don't blame the heart for being filled with rage and anger and hatred. How dare anybody does that? I don't care. Even if 10 billion people follow him, I'm going to curse him. And that's the right thing to do. That's the right thing to do. If somebody does that to Our Lady, I will not spare him. Cut me to 1,000 pieces. May Allah restore me back to life 1,000,000,000 times, and 1,000,000,000 times I'll approach you guys. And I'll do the same again. That's the way we should be. But the thing is, does it make sense? Has it happened? And if I'm feeling this way, then what about Mushkil Kusha, the lion of God and His Prophet? Why did he not feel enraged? Why not? Then Umar makes him the Chief Justice or gives him a post, and Imam Ali accepts it. He is advising them. Look at your books. Even in fiqh, they would ask, what is the view of Abu Hassan? And even when Abu Hassan, Imam Ali was not asked, and Imam Ali would interrupt, Abu Bakr and Umar would change their views. We read this in our fiqh books. Imam Ali advises Umar that when you go to war, to Persia, don't be in the forefront, don't get killed. I mean, Imam Ali should have said, yeah, be in the front, get the shahada, good for all of us. Can you not see the anomalies? Why didn't Bibi Fatima speak about it? Why are the hadith coming from Imam Sadiq? Why didn't Imam Ali speak about it clearly? Why didn't Al-Hassan, Al-Hussein, Bibi Zainab, Bibi Kulthum speak about these things clearly? Surely somebody should have spoken about it in an emphatic manner. Salman was a sympathizer of Imam Ali. Abbas was the uncle of Imam Ali. Ibn Abbas was the cousin of Imam Ali. Talha and Zubair, the great swords, were against the election at Saqifa. Why did not these people talk about it? So I'm saying, even before putting it to scrutiny, to establish its historicity, in our minds, it doesn't really make sense. Now I'm going to continue with this. I'm sorry I've continued with this khutbah, but it's a very sensitive issue. I'll continue with it in just a little while, in the second khutbah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Amma ba'd, assalamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So when you read the Sunni texts, which are authentic by their standard, Bibi Fatima left this world being extremely displeased with Abu Bakr and Umar. Undeniable. They themselves acknowledge that he who injures Fatima or upsets her has injured the Prophet. And the one who injures the Prophet, you know what that means. That is there. It needs to be discussed. Even if we admit that there was a threat made at the door of Bibi Fatima, that's not a minor thing. It's a huge thing. How dare anybody make a threat at the door of Bibi Fatima? Can you see that? It's not minor. So what I think the resolution is, what we have been doing on platforms such as Sims, that the Sunnis and the Shias need to be committed to Islam and the truth. Come together, engage in mature scholarly discussions and deliberations with a clear methodology. Not be emotional. Dispassionately, come sit down. Establish what has happened in early history. Clarify it. Don't be offended. Although it's difficult, it's a difficult task. When you have been reading something all your life and you find out there was no attack on the door of Bibi Fatima, it's difficult. Or when you find out that actually there was a threat at the door of Bibi Fatima, it's difficult. Or when you find out that Fadak was taken unjustly from Bibi Fatima, it's difficult to swallow these things. But come, sit down, discuss these issues, and then with a very mature attitude, give it out to the public. Always understanding that our commitment to Islam, Muhammad Rasulullah, the Imams, the Sahaba, Bibi Fatima, will always prompt us to safeguard the unity of the community and never to undermine it. That is the absolute red line. We cannot compromise our unity. And if the Shias can prove that the attack did take place, then prove it in a very mature and an acceptable manner. If it is proven, nobody will have any problems with it. The Sunni colleagues of mine that I meet, they said, look, if Umar has done this, we too will feel hatred the way the Shias feel hatred. Let them come together and also say that what is a popular narrative today, has it always been a popular narrative? Have there been other narratives as well in the past? Or has it become a popular narrative because we have popularized it from the pulpits? There's a huge thing here. You see, I have no doubt that Bibi Aisha did not poison the Prophet. But if I carry on hearing it in Ayyamul Fatimiyya twice a year, it won't be long before I start believing that this actually happened. And then my children will believe it, and before you know it, it becomes the popular narrative. So many things have become popular narratives now. What about their historicity, their past? Were they as popular in years that have gone? How many of us remember Ayyam Fatimiyya in our younger days? We don't remember it, do we? How many of us know about the story of the nail from our younger days? Or whip and kick and punch? How many of us? We have heard them as they have crept in ceremonially and being added to the Shia ceremonial calendar over the years. Things that have become popular narratives today may not have been so popular. I'm going to leave us with this thought. You see, it is no good saying that this movie is this and X and Y and Z person is this and that. Because the Sunnis will turn around and say, well, but you guys narrate this from your pulpits anyway. Now somebody has just made a movie and you're showing a show of anger and defiance against this particular person, but you guys are saying it anyway. If it is true by your standards, then you shouldn't be condemning it. You should just be condemning the fact that this person did not do taqiyya like you guys are doing. And then you face the mockery of taqiyya that your imams teach you to actually lie and consider that as your religion. These things need to be discussed. They really do need to be discussed. We all need to have very, very big hearts. This life is one life. We are swiftly going toward Allah. The opportunity of meeting with God is being taken away from us, honestly. We are not supposed to be involved in the things we are involved in hating each other and cursing each other. The heart should radiate with such beauty of God that even our worst enemy is a gift from God. That is where we need to be. We need to be like Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like Ali salamullah alayhi, like Hussein under the blade, who has become oblivious of all and radiating with the light of God. We need to be like that great Hussein, who embraces Hur and says, brother, not I, but my God also forgives you. That is where we are supposed to be. Trust me, it's a struggle. We need to embark upon it. Let's make that difference that we are supposed to make. Leave this world and the Muslim community in a way that when we meet Allah and His Messenger, we will say, oh Messenger of God, we did our best to bring your ummah together as one ummah, clarifying their differences and asking them not merely to tolerate each other, but to love each other, to pray with each other, to fast with each other, and to be one united body, as the Quran is saying, كَأَنَّهُمْ بُنْيَانٌ مَرْسُوسٌ عَلَى طَاعَةِ اللَّهِ, and the ta'ah of His Rasul, that they are one body in the obedience of God and His Messenger. Kindly pray Fatiha for all our marhumin, and Fatiha for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring sense to our minds, and we become one people. Al-Fatiha.